The desert was endless, a sea of burning sand under a heavy red sky. Winds carried sharp grains that cut the skin like knives. In the center of the wasteland stood a great pit, a hole so deep that no one had ever seen its bottom. The people of the desert called it the mouth of the worm, and they feared it more than death itself. On this night, the tribe had gathered around the pit, their faces hidden by hoods made of animal skin. Their voices rose together in a low chant, echoing across the dunes. The ground shook slightly with every word they spoke, as if the earth itself was answering their prayer. Torches burned in the sand, their light weak against the vast darkness of the desert. At the edge of the pit, chained to a stone pillar, was a girl. Her skin was pale compared to the tribe, her silver eyes wide with fear. She was young, barely grown, yet chosen as the sacrifice for the desert worm. Her wrists were bound by iron cuffs, her body trembling as she listened to the ground rumble beneath her feet. She tried to scream once, but the tribe only shouted louder to silence her. Her voice was nothing against the storm of their cruel ritual. Tears streaked her dusty cheeks as she looked into the black hole below her. She imagined rows of teeth waiting in the dark, imagined the beast swallowing her whole. Her heart beat so fast it felt like it would break her chest. The tribe leader stepped forward, raising his staff covered with bones. He looked down at the girl with eyes empty of pity. "Tonight," he said, his voice heavy with power, "the worm shall rise and feed, and the desert shall bless us with life once more." The people cheered, stamping their feet on the sand, shaking the earth harder. The girl shook her head, whispering to herself, "Please no, please not me." But no one cared. No one listened. She was nothing but an offering. A wind blew across the desert, carrying more sand into her face, and she closed her eyes. She thought of her family, long gone, and wondered if she would see them in death. Fear wrapped around her like chains, stronger than the ones holding her down. Then the ground rumbled again, but this time it was different. It was not the chant that shook the desert. It was something far away, something heavy approaching. The torches flickered. The tribe stopped their song, all turning to the horizon. Through the red dust and shadows, a figure appeared. At first, they thought it was a mirage, a trick of the desert. But slowly, step by step, a man walked toward them. He was tall, wrapped in a long dark coat, his boots crushing the sand with steady weight. A hood covered his face, but his movements were certain, fearless. In his hand, he carried something shining, a blade scarred by old battles. The tribe hissed, whispering to each other, "A human, a wanderer, a fool." The girl raised her head, her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen a human before, only heard stories of their madness. Yet here he was, walking straight into death without hesitation. The leader raised his staff and shouted, "You are not welcome here. Wanderer, leave now or be buried with the worm." The man did not answer. He did not even slow his steps. He kept walking, eyes fixed on the chain girl. Something in his presence made the desert feel smaller. The torches flared brighter, as if feeding on his defiance. The girl's heart pounded again, but this time not from fear. For the first time that night, a spark of hope lit inside her. Who was this human, and why did he come here? She searched his face as he came closer, but the shadows of his hood hid his expression. The tribe grew restless, their chanting broken, their control slipping. The leader struck his staff against the ground, and the earth roared in reply. The pit trembled, and a foul stench rose from its depths. The worm was waking, its hunger stronger than ever. The human stopped at the edge of the circle of torches. The desert wind pulled back his hood, revealing a scarred face with eyes sharp as steel. He looked at the girl, then at the pit, then finally at the tribe. His lips curled into a hard line, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Not tonight," he said. The tribe shouted in rage, lifting their weapons. The girl gasped, the ground shaking harder now. The sand beneath her rattled, as if something massive was climbing upward. The sound of scales grinding against stone filled the air. The worm was coming, and there was no escape. But the human did not move back. He raised his blade, the fire of the torches reflecting in its edge. The desert trembled, the tribe screamed, the girl held her breath, and the worm began to rise from the pit. The night was no longer silent. It was filled with chaos, fear, and the first spark of defiance. The sacrifice had begun, but so had something greater. The desert was alive with fear. The chant of the tribe had broken, replaced by whispers and cries. The girl trembled in her chains, her silver eyes fixed on the stranger who dared to step closer. The worm's roar from the depths shook the ground, yet the human did not stop. His boots pressed into the sand with steady force, each step echoing louder than the chants of the tribe. The leader of the tribe snarled, his staff shaking in his hands. He had seen humans before, but none so bold, none so foolish. The human's coat flapped with the wind, the scars on his face lit by torchlight. There was no fear in his expression, only determination. He stopped only a few feet away from the pit, staring directly into the darkness. The girl could not understand. Was he here to die or to save her? The tribe shouted at him, their voices filled with anger. You cannot fight the worm. No blade can pierce its hide. No man can face its hunger. But the human only tilted his head, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade tighter. He did not answer. His silence was louder than any words. The ground cracked beneath them, a wave of dust rising from the pit. The girl whimpered, pulling against her chains though her wrists bled from the effort. The earth shook harder, a deep, groaning echo filling the air. It was the sound of the worm waking, hungry, angry, unstoppable. The human glanced at the girl, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. In that instant, she felt something she had not felt in days. Hope. It was small, fragile, but it was enough to steady her breath. She whispered, though no one heard, "Please don't leave me." The worm's head burst from the pit, a mountain of flesh and scales. Its body towered into the sky, its jaws wide, lined with teeth sharp enough to split stone. The tribe dropped to their knees, chanting again, calling it their god. They believed the girl would soon be swallowed, and their desert blessed. But the human stepped forward, standing between her and the monster. The torchlight flickered against the creature's hide. The girl gasped at its size, her body frozen with terror. The human, however, moved with calm precision. He raised his blade, its surface scarred but unbroken. His voice was quiet, but every soul heard it. "Not tonight," he repeated. The worm lunged, its jaw snapping toward the pit's edge. The sand exploded in all directions, fire and dust mixing in the air. The tribe cheered, believing the human would be crushed. But at the last second, he moved. His body rolled across the ground, the worm's fangs biting into sand where he had stood. The girl's breath caught, her heart pounding. He was fast, impossibly fast for someone carrying such weight. The human struck back, his blade flashing in the firelight. Sparks flew as steel met the hard scales of the worm. The sound echoed like thunder, the beast roaring in pain. For the first time, the tribe went silent. Their god had been wounded. The girl's chains rattled as she tried to push back against the pillar. She could hardly believe what she saw. The human, a lone figure of flesh and blood, standing against a creature that filled the desert sky. And yet, with each strike, he forced the beast back, even if only by inches. He shouted once, not to the tribe, not to the girl, but to himself, "Stand, damn it, stand until the end." The worm thrashed, slamming its body against the ground. The shock wave knocked several tribesmen off their feet. Sandstorms rose, blinding the people, but not the human. He pressed forward, weaving between the beast's strikes. Every move of his blade was desperate yet precise. He was not fighting only to live. He was fighting to protect. The girl cried out as one of the worm's strikes shattered the stone near her chains. The human's eyes darted toward her, sharp and calculating even in chaos. He saw her pain, her fear, her helplessness. For a moment, his jaw tightened. Then he charged, not away from the worm, but toward her. His blade struck the chains, sparks flying into the night. The iron cracked but did not break. Still, the girl felt the weight of her prison weaken. The tribe leader roared in fury. Blasphemy! He frees the sacrifice. The people screamed, throwing stones and spears at the human. But the desert wind turned against them, carrying sand into their faces. The human stood firm, his blade raised again. The worm screamed, its roar drowning out every other sound. The girl's breath hitched, her heart torn between terror and wonder. She whispered again, louder this time, "Don't stop, please, don't stop." The human spat blood into the sand, his body battered by the beast's force. But his eyes never wavered. He turned once more toward the worm, and the fire of defiance burned in him brighter than the torches. His voice carried over the howling storm. "You call it a god, but it will bleed like any other beast." The girl stared, her fear turning into something else. For the first time in her life, she believed in something stronger than the desert. Not in the worm, not in the tribe, but in the will of one human. And as the worm pulled back for another strike, she knew the night would not end as the tribe had planned. The desert shook as the worm's body dragged itself higher from the pit. Its endless coils pushed through the earth like rivers of flesh. The creature's roar shook the sky, rattling every bone in the girl's body. She pressed herself against the stone pillar, her chains biting deeper into her wrists. Terror filled her lungs, and yet her eyes never left the human. The worm was bigger now, its head stretching higher than the tallest dunes. Its hide was armored with thick scales, each one shining under torchlight like jagged metal. Its eyes burned with hunger, its tongue flickering in and out, tasting the fear of those around it. The tribe fell to their knees, their chants desperate and frantic. They raised their hands, calling the beast their god. The girl wanted to scream, wanted to tell them it was not a god, it was death. But her voice failed her, caught in her throat. The human stood tall, his blade resting against his shoulder. He did not look at the tribe. He did not look at the girl. His gaze was fixed on the monster before him. There was no fear, only the cold, sharp focus of a man who had seen death many times before. The sand whipped around his coat, but he did not flinch. Every inch of him was carved with scars of old battles. And in that moment, the girl thought he looked like a storm walking on two legs. The worm roared again, the sound a wall of thunder. Its jaws opened wide, rows of teeth spinning inward like saw blades. It lunged, the ground breaking under its weight. The tribe screamed in joy, believing their god would crush the human in one strike. But he moved. He threw himself to the side, rolling across the sand. The worm's head smashed into the ground where he had stood, spraying sand high into the air. The girl gasped, coughing as dust filled her lungs. She squinted through the haze, trying to see. Then sparks lit the night. The human's blade struck against the worm's scale. The sound rang out like steel on stone. The worm shrieked, pulling back, its movements violent enough to topple torches and send tribesmen tumbling. The human staggered, but did not fall. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead, sliding down his cheek. He wiped it with the back of his hand, then raised the blade again. His voice cut through the chaos, low but steady. "You bleed. Monster, that means you can die." The tribe cried out in anger, throwing stones and curses. But the worm's thrashing sent many of them scattering. It did not care about its worshippers, only its prey, the human and the girl. It slammed its body against the ground, waves of sand rolling across the desert. The girl's chains rattled, nearly pulling her down. She screamed as the worm's massive head swung in her direction. Its jaws opened, aiming to swallow her whole. "Move!" the human shouted. He rushed toward her, his blade flashing in the firelight. With one mighty strike, he slammed his weapon against the chain. Iron split, sparks flying into the air. The shackle around her wrist cracked open. The girl gasped, staring in shock. For the first time, she was not bound. The worm lunged again. The human grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as the creature's teeth closed around the pillar. Stone shattered, the ground breaking apart. The tribe screamed in confusion, their sacrifice stolen from their god. Dust and sand swirled in a storm around them. The girl stumbled, her legs weak from fear and exhaustion. But the human kept her upright, his grip like iron. "Stand," he said, his voice harsh. "Stand, or it will kill you." Her body obeyed, even if her mind could not. She leaned against him, trembling, but alive. She looked at him closely for the first time. His face was lined with old pain, his eyes sharp and cold. Yet there was something else, something fierce and unbreakable. She whispered, barely audible, Why save me?" But he gave no answer, only turned back to face the worm. The beast thrashed again, pulling its massive coils higher from the pit. Each movement sent shockwaves through the desert. The torches were nearly all gone, their flames drowned in sand. The tribe no longer chanted, they screamed. Some fled into the night. Others threw themselves to the ground, begging the worm for mercy. But the human stood unmoving, his blade steady. The girl realized he was not here for glory, not for the tribe, not even for her. He was here because he refused to bend. He refused to let the desert win. The worm roared, its voice breaking the night sky. Its head snapped down toward them. The human stepped forward, swinging his blade with all his strength. The steel cut deep, not through the scales, but into the soft flesh between them. Black blood sprayed, thick and foul, burning the sand where it fell. The worm shrieked, thrashing in pain. The ground shook so violently the girl fell to her knees. But she did not cry, she did not beg. She watched in awe as the human fought her god and lived. In that moment, she understood something terrifying and beautiful. The worm was not eternal. The tribe was not invincible. And the human before her was not just a man. He was proof that even in the heart of the desert, defiance could rise against the impossible. The worm pulled back, its massive body coiling, ready for another strike. The night was far from over. The true battle had only begun. The desert had become a battlefield. Sandstorms twisted around the pit, whipped up by the violent movements of the worm. The sky above burned with red fire as torches struggled against the wind. The girl stood with broken chains at her side, her wrists raw and bleeding. Beside her, the human stood tall, his blade raised, his breath steady despite the chaos. The worm's body coiled like a mountain of flesh, its scales grinding against each other with a sound that made bones ache. Its jaws open wide, a scream ripping through the night, a scream that shook the dunes for miles. The tribe scattered, some falling to their knees in worship, others running in blind terror. They had never seen their god bleed, but black blood stained the sand, proof of the human strike. The worm lunged again, its head snapping down with the speed of a thunderbolt. The human leapt aside, rolling across the sand, his coat tearing, his body slamming into the ground. Before he could rise fully, the worm struck again, its tail whipping like a giant spear. The blow sent him flying, his body crashing into a dune. The girl screamed, thinking he was dead. But then, through the cloud of dust, he stood, blood dripping from his mouth, his blade still in his hand. The worm roared in fury, slamming its coils against the ground. The shock waves spread through the desert, knocking over the last of the torches. Darkness swallowed the pit, broken only by the glow of the worm's burning eyes. The girl crawled back, her body shaking, but she could not take her eyes off the human. She whispered to herself, "He stands, he still stands." The human moved forward again, each step heavy but unyielding. He circled the worm, watching its movements with the eyes of a predator. The tribe leader shouted from behind the chaos, his staff raised high. "Kill him, O Great One! Crush this fool who dares insult the desert." But the worm ignored the words, its attention fixed on the single man who had dared wound it. The human rushed forward, his blade glowing faintly in the starlight. He swung with all his strength, aiming for the soft gaps between the scales. The steel struck true, sinking into the flesh, black blood spraying. The worm shrieked, its head rearing back. The girl shielded her face from the rain of burning blood, the sand sizzling where it landed. The stench filled the air, thick and choking. The worm struck again, its jaws snapping so close that the human's coat was torn by its teeth. He rolled under its strike, thrusting upward with his blade. The steel cut deep into the beast's jaw, sparks and blood exploding into the air. The worm recoiled, its body twisting violently. The ground cracked open as its coils slammed down. The human was thrown back again, but he landed on one knee, coughing blood, refusing to fall. The girl tried to move toward him, but fear froze her legs. She felt useless, weak, a shadow compared to his strength. "Still," she shouted, her voice breaking, "behind you." The human turned just as the worm's tail crashed down. He lifted his blade and braced himself. The impact shook his body like thunder. He was driven to the ground, his arms shaking with the force, but he did not break. With a roar of his own, he slashed upward, splitting the tail's flesh open. The worm thrashed in rage, knocking down its own worshippers. The tribe cried out, half in awe, half in terror. They saw their god bleeding again, and doubt spread among them like fire. The leader shouted, "Do not fear, the worm cannot die." But his words were hollow, even to himself. The girl's chains clattered at her side as she forced herself to stand. Her body trembled, but she would not hide anymore. She picked up a broken shard of stone from the ground, gripping it tight. It was nothing compared to the human's weapon, but it was something. She shouted, "Strike the eye," her voice cutting through the storm. The human glanced at her, then at the beast. For the first time, he allowed himself a small, grim smile. The worm lunged again, jaws wide. The human sprinted forward, faster than the eye could follow. He slid beneath the monster's head, his blade flashing upward. The steel pierced the beast's eye, sinking deep. The worm screamed, a sound so loud it split the sky. Its body convulsed, shaking the desert like an earthquake. The tribe scattered completely, their faith shattered. The leader dropped his staff, his mouth open in disbelief. The girl shielded her ears, her body nearly thrown from the ground. She stared through tears and sand, watching the human cling to his blade lodged in the worm's skull. The monster smashed its head against the dunes, trying to shake him off, but he held tight, driving the blade deeper. Black blood poured down in rivers, soaking the sand. The worm's roars grew weaker, though its fury remained. The human finally tore his blade free, dropping back onto the sand. His chest heaved, his body cut and bruised. Yet he stood once more, blade in hand, facing the towering beast. The girl whispered, "He will not stop. Not until it ends." The worm pulled back, its body trembling. Its remaining eye glared at the human with hatred and fear. For the first time in its long existence, the monster knew pain. And the desert, once silent in worship, now trembled with the promise of defiance. The clash of strength was far from over. But for the first time, it was no longer clear who would win. The desert storm raged around them. The worm thrashed in blind fury, its injured eye pouring black blood into the sand. Every strike of its massive body split the ground, tearing open cracks and sending waves of dust into the air. The tribe had fallen into chaos, many fleeing into the dunes, others clawing at the earth in prayer. Their chants were broken now, weak against the roar of the dying monster. The girl stood trembling beside the shattered pillar, her wrists raw where the chains had been cut. One shackle still clung to her arm, the broken link rattling with every movement. She stared at the human, her chest tight with fear and something else. He had saved her once, but the fight was far from finished. If the worm killed him, she would still be dragged into death. Her hand clenched around the shard of stone she had picked up, her only weapon. Her thoughts screamed, "I am useless," yet her heart whispered, "No, I must fight." The human staggered forward, blood dripping from cuts on his arms and face. His blade was slick with black slime, but his grip on it was unbroken. He stood between the girl, and the worm, as if his body alone could shield her. The worm pulled back, its massive coils writhing, its single remaining eye blazing with rage. It lunged again, its jaw wide enough to swallow them both. The girl screamed, but the human did not retreat. He threw himself sideways, pulling her down with him. The worm's teeth slammed into the sand, tearing apart the ground where they had stood. The shock wave knocked her breathless, but she felt his hand gripping her arm tight. He pulled her to her feet with one word, "Stand." Her knees shook, her breath ragged, but she stood. The worm roared again, furious that its prey still lived. The tribe leader raised his broken staff, his voice wild. "Obey your god. Worm, swallow them. Give us your blessing." But the beast no longer listened. Its hunger and pain were too great. It struck again, its tail whipping across the desert like a crashing wave. The human shoved the girl aside, taking the brunt of the blow. He was hurled across the sand, his body crashing into a dune. The girl's heart froze, her stomach twisting. She stumbled toward him, shouting, "No, get up, please get up." The worm turned toward her, sensing her weakness. It lowered its head, teeth glinting in the dying torchlight. Her hand tightened around the shard of stone. Fear screamed inside her, but a different fire burned now. She lifted the shard and hurled it at the monster's face. It struck just below its remaining eye, too small to wound, but enough to distract. The worm's head turned sharply toward her, its roar vibrating through her bones. But in that single heartbeat, the human rose again, staggering yet alive. He charged, his blade flashing as he slammed it into the exposed flesh of the worm's jaw. The monster shrieked, pulling back violently. Its head reared high into the air, throwing sand like a storm. The girl gasped, relief flooding her chest. He had seen her act, and he had seized the chance she gave him. For the first time, she realized she was not just a victim. She could fight, even in small ways. The human looked at her, his eyes hard, his voice sharp. "Together, or we both die here." The words struck her deeper than any blade. She nodded, her fear burning into determination. Though she held no real weapon, she knew she could still help. Even if it was only to distract, to throw, to scream, to draw the monster's gaze. The worm lunged again, its mouth tearing into the ground. The human rolled away, his blade slicing across its tongue. Black blood sprayed, sizzling into the sand. The girl stumbled to his side, grabbing a fallen torch. The flames flickered weakly in the storm, but it was enough. She thrust it forward when the worm came close. The beast recoiled, hissing as fire licked against its wounded flesh. The human used the moment, his blade striking deep into its neck. The worm screamed, thrashing so violently the desert floor cracked apart. The girl fell to her knees, clutching the torch, but her eyes stayed on the human. He pulled his blade free, his chest heaving, his voice harsh but steady. "It bleeds, it burns, it can fall." The tribe leader wailed, dropping to the sand. "No, no, this cannot be. The worm is eternal." But his words were lost in the chaos. The tribe had seen too much, their faith broken, their god wounded. They began to scatter into the night, leaving their leader behind. The girl's body ached, her wrists burned, her throat raw from shouting. Yet she felt stronger now than she ever had. She was no longer just a sacrifice, no longer just prey. The human had shown her that defiance could live even in the desert. And for the first time, she felt she could stand beside him, not behind. The worm pulled back, its massive body writhing. The desert floor groaned under its weight. Its eye fixed on the human, burning with hatred. But in its gaze was something new. Not only hunger, not only rage, but fear. The human raised his blade once more, blood dripping from his wounds. The girl stood beside him, the torch shaking in her hands. Two figures, broken yet unyielding, facing a god together. The desert roared, the worm screamed, and the battle for survival raged on. The desert was breaking apart. Every strike of the worm shook the ground like thunder, splitting open cracks that swallowed torches and tribesmen alike. The red sky above seemed to tremble with each roar, as if the heavens themselves feared the beast's anger. The girl clung to the torch in her hands, her body weak, yet her spirit burning brighter than ever before. Beside her, the human stood with his blade dripping black blood, his chest heaving but his stance unshaken. The worm pulled back, its massive body coiling higher into the air, its shadow covering them both. Its wounded eye glowed with fury, its scream rattling the dunes for miles. The tribe leader shouted from the distance, his voice shrill, "Destroy them, Great One, destroy them and drink their flesh." But his cries sounded desperate now, empty and broken. Many of the tribe had already fled into the night, their faith shattered. Only a few still knelt in the sand, begging their God for mercy that would never come. The worm lunged again, its body crashing down like a falling mountain. The human pushed the girl aside and rolled into the sand. The impact split the ground, throwing both of them into the air. The girl hit the ground hard, gasping as her breath was torn from her chest. She looked up in horror, watching as the worm's jaws opened above the human. But he did not retreat. Instead, he ran forward, straight into the monster's maw. At the last instant, he dove beneath its fangs, slashing his blade upward with all his strength. The steel tore through the soft flesh inside its mouth, blood spraying in thick rivers. The worm screamed, its head jerking back violently. Its roar shook the desert like a storm, sending the last torches crashing into darkness. The girl struggled to her feet, her hands shaking. Her eyes burned as she searched for him, her heart racing in terror. Through the haze of dust, she saw him, standing, his blade black with blood. He wiped his mouth, his chest heaving, but his eyes were still sharp, still alive. She whispered to herself, "He cannot fall. Not now, not ever." The worm thrashed wildly, slamming its coils into the sand. The shock waves ripped across the desert, toppling the broken pillar where she had been chained. The girl stumbled, nearly falling into one of the cracks opening in the ground. But the human's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay with me. Don't let the desert take you." She forced her legs to move, staggering toward him, her torch still burning weakly. The worm coiled again, preparing another strike. Its body rose higher than ever before, blotting out the stars. The girl felt small beneath it, smaller than a grain of sand. Yet the human stood firm, his feet planted in the earth, his blade raised high. His voice carried across the battlefield, low but unbreakable. "You are no god," he growled. "You are just another beast, and beasts can fall." The worm struck again, faster this time. Its head slammed toward him, its fangs glinting in the firelight. The human roared and met the attack head-on. His blade flashed, striking deep into the wounded eye. The worm screamed, its body convulsing. Black blood exploded from the wound, burning the sand where it fell. The girl shielded her face from the spray, her body shaking with both terror and awe. The worm writhed in agony, its body slamming against the dunes, crushing its own worshippers beneath its coils. The tribe leader fell to his knees, his staff slipping from his hands. "No," he cried, his voice breaking. "This cannot be. The worm cannot die." But the sight before him said otherwise. The human stood unyielding, his blade dripping with the blood of their so-called god. The girl's fear twisted into something new, something fierce. She stepped forward, her torch raised, her voice breaking but loud. "It bleeds, it burns, it can fall." The words echoed across the desert. The human glanced at her, and for the first time, she saw fire in his eyes that was not only rage but also pride. The worm shrieked again, pulling back its massive body. It was desperate now, wounded, cornered, enraged. The human staggered but stood tall, his body battered, his blade still steady. His defiance was stronger than the desert, stronger than the tribe, stronger even than fear. And the girl, no longer a sacrifice, no longer a victim, stood beside him. Together, They faced the monster, two small figures against a mountain of death. The desert roared with the sound of the worm's fury. The ground cracked, the wind screamed. The night itself seemed ready to collapse. But the human's voice cut through it all, steady and unyielding. "This ends tonight." The worm lunged, its body twisting in a final frenzy of rage. The girl tightened her grip on the torch, her heart steady at last. And the human raised his blade high, ready to strike with every last breath he had. The desert had never seen such defiance. And in that moment, even a worm seemed to know it. The desert was alive with chaos. The worm's body coiled in fury, tearing open dunes and swallowing the last fires of the tribe. Its scream was endless, a sound that rattled the heavens, a sound that promised death. Yet in front of it stood only two figures, small against its shadow. A scarred human with a blade dripping black blood, and a broken alien girl clutching a dying torch. The worm lunged, its jaws opening wider than a canyon. The human charged to meet it, his body battered but unyielding. His blade flashed in the air, striking deep into the soft flesh of its mouth. The monster shrieked, black blood spraying across the desert like rain. The girl stumbled back, shielding her face, her heart pounding like a drum. But through the storm she saw him, standing, refusing to fall. The worm thrashed, smashing its coils into the earth. The ground split open, rivers of sand pouring into the cracks. The last of the tribe screamed and fled into the night, their faith shattered, their god wounded beyond repair. Only the leader remained, his voice broken. "No, no, this cannot be. The worm is eternal. It cannot die." But his words were drowned in the chaos, meaningless against the roar of the battle. The girl's hand shook, her torch nearly gone. Yet she stepped forward, standing beside the human. Her voice rang out, trembling but fierce. "It bleeds, it burns, it can fall." The words cut through the storm, echoing across the desert. The human glanced at her, and for a brief moment, a spark of pride lit his scarred face. The worm lunged again, desperate in its fury. The human met it head-on, swinging his blade with all his strength. The steel cut into its wounded eye, piercing deep. The monster screamed, its entire body convulsing. The ground shook so violently that dunes collapsed in waves. The girl fell to her knees, but her eyes never left him. He hung onto the blade with both hands, driving it deeper, deeper, until the worm's screams shook the stars. The desert went silent for a heartbeat. Then, with a final convulsion, the worm's body crashed into the earth. Its coils fell heavy like mountains of flesh, sending sand flying into the night sky. The impact shook the pit, filling it with rubble and dust. The girl gasped, her chest tight, as the black blood poured like rivers into the cracks of the desert. The monster twitched once, then went still. The endless roar was gone, replaced by silence. The human staggered back, his blade dripping, his chest heaving. He wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes fixed on the beast's corpse. The girl rose slowly, her body weak, her heart racing. She whispered, "It's dead. The worm is dead." Her words were carried by the wind, spreading across the empty desert. The tribe leader fell to his knees, clutching the sand in disbelief. Our God has fallen," he wailed. Then he fled into the dunes, leaving behind his broken faith. The girl looked at the human, her silver eyes wide with awe. He stood like a shadow carved against the stars, his blade heavy at his side. She took a trembling step toward him, her voice soft. "Why?" she asked. "Why save me?" For a moment, he was silent, his face hidden in shadow. Then he answered, his voice low but steady, "Because no one else would." The words struck her deeper than any blade. Tears filled her eyes, but not from fear. For the first time, she felt the weight of hope. The desert was no longer just a grave of sand and death. It was the place where defiance had risen, where a man had stood against a god and won. The human turned, pulling his hood over his scarred face. He began to walk away, his boots leaving deep prints in the sand. The girl took a step after him, her voice breaking. "Wait, don't leave." But he did not stop. He only lifted his blade onto his shoulder. The desert wind swallowed her words. She watched him vanish into the dust, his figure fading into the endless dunes. Her heart ached, yet burned with fire. She whispered to herself, "I saw him. I saw the human who defied the worm." Her voice shook, but it carried with pride. She knew the desert would never forget this night. The tribe would whisper of it. The sands would hold it. The stars would remember it. The worm, once worshipped as eternal, lay broken and dead in the earth. And the legend of the human began.